Good morning, everyone. Welcome to, can you all hear me? Is this good? Yes, I have some awkward height, so I'll be doing this. Happy Sunday of Comic-Con. Everyone's made it this far, so congratulations to you all for surviving the con so far. We have one con casualty. Our good friend and colleague, Dr. Aaron Trammell, is not going to be here. He got sick. He had 2 weddings and a whole lot of stuff the past few weeks, and so he wishes he could be here. So yeah, please honor Aaron's contributions, and we'll try to conjure his spirit. So my name's Brian MacDonald. I work at UCLA, and I represent the GeekED series of panels. So I think this is the 9th year. There's 3 original members in the audience. Raise your hands, say hello. Hey. So 9 years of bringing the idea of nerd culture, pop culture, and higher education together for meaningful conversations around what a great college experience can be for folks who come to Comic-Con or come to other pop culture conventions or see something in pop culture, in TV and comics, and either are inspired by it, see themselves represented in it, or get inspired for a possible career path, and how can we make college feel like a little more like Comic-Con, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So this particular panel, Esports, Gaming, and Playing with Gender. I guess maybe just quick temperature. How many folks in the audience work at a university full-time as a professor or staff member? How many folks are college students right now, or prospective students, or high school students? Any parents of college students, or prospective or former college students? So we have a good mix in here. And anyone who's been around higher ed once, for a while, will once, see something come through, and there's times where professors and staff members have an opportunity to inform that trend, and other times that train takes off and we're trying to play catch up. And so games and play and the study of those and community around play and games has been on college campuses for a very long time. And esports is something that I think is continuing to emerge in the conversation, and you see some universities who are jumping on board and organizing, and others who are a little bit slower but to sort of adopt it. But some of the same issues that we have been talking about at these panels and on college campuses and at Comic-Con are emerging. And so today we really want to look at the way that gender identity, gender expression, who's playing games, who's making games, how is community forming around games with respect to gender. And before we get into the conversation, we may be talking about some topics in here that people have real life experience with, and we want to honor that experience. Sometimes these conversations can be a lot of fun, sometimes they can be challenging, sometimes they remind us of amazing experiences, sometimes they remind us of experiences that weren't so amazing. And as we talk about issues such as designing games, making people feel included, these are issues. Someone's gender and gender identity and gender expression is not an issue. That is not a problem. The problem is how folks are treated. So I want to make sure that we state that very clearly. And at this particular panel, as we talk about some of these issues, if someone says something that you like, or if you want to take a picture or quote them, we ask that maybe it'd be great after the panel to ask them if that's okay, and get the quote right and continue the conversation on social media. So without any further ground rules or framing, I'd love to have our panelists all introduce themselves, say who they are, what they do, and if there's a little bit of their origin story of how they came to be on this panel, why these issues are important, I'd invite them to share that. So we can start right here with Amanda.
All right, thanks, Brian. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Amanda Cullen. I use she, her pronouns. Thank you very much. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of California, Irvine. Dr. Trammell, Aaron, who's missing, is my advisor. He's a great guy, does interesting work, and I'm so sorry he couldn't be here because one of my little anecdotes is about him, so now he's not even here to respond to that. The work I do, my dissertation looks at women who work as professional live streamers, but I also do work affiliated with esports. I'm interested in these spaces as professional spaces where play and work, the boundaries between them become blurred. And sort of why I'm on this panel today is because of the esports work that I do. At the University of California, Irvine now, we have an esports program in Arena. We have 2 scholarship teams. where undergraduates get scholarships to play these games. The arena sort of launched the year that I started my PhD at UCI. And it was also the same year that Overwatch came out, so my initial work in this space was with Overwatch and thinking of it as, a game that like fans really, really responded to, and in particular, the huge LGBT or queer players fanship that sort of built around it, but also I was interested in it as a competitive space. And one day I was watching a streaming of a match, I think it was the very beginning of the Overwatch League, on Twitch, and I noticed these horrible comments in the chat that people were sharing about one of the women who was shoutcasting the match, and I was horrified. And I went to Aaron and I said, this makes me really angry, and I don't know what to do about it. And he said, well, you could do something about it, like right here on this campus, now that the arena is opened and we are launching these new programs. Maybe we can help guide them to think more about diversity and inclusion and what the space looks like. Like it can be more than just a space like maybe that takes advantage of students and their passion for games, or just treats it as like a pipeline into like the industry or competitive gaming. Like we could make a real difference here. So we started by organizing a panel on women in gaming, where we invited professionals from across the industry as well as like student organizations to talk about their experiences with women in gaming. That sort of snowballed into what we now call the Girls in Gaming Summer Camp, which is now in its third year, where we invite girls and young women approximately ages 12 to 17 to come to this camp, and they interact with women in a variety of spaces in games who share their experiences, both good and bad, what it's like to be a woman in this space. And also gives them an opportunity to form community with other young women their age. And I'm also in a task force that's redesigning the code of conduct and language and policies that's used in the esports arena for the staff and scholarship players to try and encourage more inclusive practices and better behavior when they're playing online, but also in real life arena spaces.
Hi everyone, my name is Cherie Lin. I'm a recent grad from UC Berkeley. While I was there, I was the president of the League of Legends Club for 3 years, and then it grew to an extent that I became a founding team member of Cal Esports, which is the official university recognized esports org, which was really exciting. And then on the back of that, I got employed by the school as an intern to found Cal Women in Gaming, which is our female empowerment initiative. And the reason I'm interested about esports and playing with gender is because as someone who kind of was surrounded by only guys in high school because there weren't many other people to talk about games with, coming to college and finding a community of female gamers and also close guy friends, and being able to graduate and have a group of lifelong friends has been amazing. And I think a lot of luck went into that, and a lot of structure that I've been trying to build, I think can guide that in the future. And so making that experience possible for other people, I think is why I'm here. Yeah.
Hi, good morning. My name is David Surratt. I'm currently a Vice President for Student Affairs and Dean of Students at the University of Oklahoma, and a prior Assistant Vice Chancellor at UC Berkeley, where I got to actually meet Cherie. I think why this topic's been important to me is the idea and conversations around gaming and esports has been kind of getting really intense when it comes to college campuses and communities. And even, there's still conversations with even the NCAA about how you manage that across, college campuses in the country. As a senior student affairs administrator, I think that we need to be a part of the conversation ahead of the game as well, to be able to proactively talk about civility in those kind of situations, or talk about inclusivity, or talk about community building when it comes to the idea of what esports has been and what it's creating in terms of the ecology of connection and participation. The other piece that I'm excited about is being able to talk to college students about everything that is a positive externality around gaming or esports. And I'm hopeful that we can continue to talk about how we flip the conversation too, because the idea of competition has been a big focus for some areas and some not so much. But I'm hoping that we start analyzing and reflecting on how competition historically had been a way that had actually created gender exclusivity for a lot of men who are coming in with very challenging ideas, assumptions about who should participate, who's good enough to be at the table. And I think it's important for me and other people that are colleagues of mine that are senior student affairs administrators to be part of that conversation too. So.
Hi, my name is Sarah Harker. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and I'm losing my voice. I use she, her pronouns. Did I already say that? Yeah, sorry. So this is where I kind of out myself as not being a huge esports person, because when I was young, trying to get involved in esports, I was called, sorry if this word lands on people hardly or badly, I was called a fag and a woman, which is both true, but also that's not why I'm bad at video games. I just had bad internet and I didn't have the time investment. But my current passion in terms of gaming is that I actually do a lot of work with tabletop RPG communities, especially online. I'm part of something called the Uncaged Collective, which is a group of tabletop RPG writers from around the world of very diverse backgrounds who are working to make inclusive feminist retellings of monsters, of making inclusive tables. I lost my train of thought, so I'm going to leave it there.
That's great, and thank you to my colleagues for also reminding me I use he, him, his pronouns, and if hearing folks identify their personal/preferred gender pronouns is a new concept, ask one of us after, and we can talk about that. I also do want to give Dr. Aaron Trammell a shout out as well. He also focuses a lot of his research in tabletop gaming, and he's done a lot of work on the history of some of those games, the history of Dungeons and Dragons. He's done some editing and consulting on the way that gender is portrayed in some of the gaming materials of a lot of different games, and again, wishes he could be here. So wow, we have some amazing things to talk about, and so I'm hoping that a few of our panelists who just mentioned a few of the either newer initiatives or long-standing initiatives on their campuses. For anyone who has been part of a new initiative and seen that from conception through implementation, or if you either on a college campus or maybe in some of the other venues that you all mentioned that could inform how members of the audience find these communities on their college campuses, talk a little bit about some of these initiatives that you all have been involved with and how they've impacted college students. Anyone can jump in.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about Cullen Gaming. This is actually our merch. Yay. But Cullen Gaming, basically, I think the school did a great job of empowering us. Essentially, they identified myself and also one of my classmates as people that were already very into the gaming community, and basically told us like, hey, can you kind of put together this initiative for us? And kind of off of that kickboard, we had a lot of resources in terms of monetary and also community and company kind of connections to kind of just ideate whatever we wanted. And so off of that, we thought of maybe a mentorship program. And so from that, we kind of have been able to connect both professionals, industry professionals in the field, and students at Berkeley to go on monthly calls and talk about, career progression, talk about their resume, their cover letters, and things that they might be facing in school. And that's been a really awesome program, and a lot of people have been able to talk about like internships and that kind of thing. My personal mentor works at NVIDIA, and I was able to go to their studio and meet her, which was amazing. I think that kind of connection with people in the industry has been really great for those industry mentors that have been looking for a way to empower the next generation, and also, of course, the students that get a lot of value out of that. I think one of the things maybe that I learned from this 1 year of founding Cullen Gaming is that it's really important to listen to the community and see what they need. When I was going into it, I was thinking like one of the things that I really wanted was more like industry mentorship and more professional development, and so that's why I kind of led it in that direction. But after meeting people at our kickoff events and at our first events, there was really a push for like people just wanted to hang out and wanted to be in a LAN party or play board games together. So I think having a good direction and having a strong direction and working towards that is really important, but also having an open mind and talking to students and seeing what they need is equally important.
Yeah, I just want to chime in too. Cherie and the other student leaders who were able to work on that was during my time at UC Berkeley as Associate Vice Chancellor. And the one thing that inspired me now from your model has been to figure out how to continue to challenge kind of spectator assumptions around esports and gaming, challenging the nature of it, how intellectual it is, how research-based it is, how it includes so many things outside of just competition, and the development of both, the creativity, the artwork, the design, the media. There's so many skills that you flex in that process, and so you all have been really an inspiration for me. The one thing I also share with Cherie privately too is that I hope that in the future, colleges and universities can think creatively about ways in which you leverage this excitement in ways that can be as holistic as possible for college students too, because there's so much there. So, absolutely.
Yeah, David, I did want to see if you could, on these initiatives, I remember a couple years ago when a particular athletic conference group of chancellors that is one of the schools I work at voted down to organize esports, and I think there's still a lot of this idea that there is no intellectual life connected to esports. How did you, as a campus leader, defy that logic and help move things along when you were at Berkeley?
Yeah. No, I'll say that there's still work to be done. There's many challenges. I think the one challenge at Berkeley was trying to figure out what is the intellectual home. And I know Irvine has done a great job of being able to connect to the research backing and background of that. Funny enough, for me politically, I'm trying to figure out how to connect the dots now at Oklahoma. The areas of interest for me, I'll say it out there, I'm still trying to be in talks, is one, connecting to the interest from athletics. And I've made it clear to them too, I'm not really interested in making this a varsity sport. I want to make sure it's inclusive as possible. But I've got them to hear why we were inspired to connect with SF Shock at UC Berkeley, or connect with folks who are part owners of major sports arenas and franchises. They see the value, and then there's these kind of cultural connections with athletes who see gaming and competition, and they connect that way. Great, pull you in. Or even looking at venues too. If you have access and control to large venues, basketball arenas, for example, like NRG does, I've talked to athletics about how do we do that same kind of connection at a campus like Oklahoma, a Power 5 conference in athletics, and how do we tie that in. The other piece is that we've got one of the only schools of College of Journalism in the state of Oklahoma. And when I look at the students, they're doing the shoutcasting, they're doing the media stuff, they're doing the blogging, the writing, they're tapping into all these different types of ways co-curricularly that connect to the work. And so just finding ties to figure out the interest has been really fun to do in a place I think is right for that. And similarly, I think at Berkeley, where we wanted to continue to do is figure out how do we connect more with the curricular pieces. Who is willing to invest that time and effort there? So.
I would say that's actually really important, is having a wide lens as to what constitutes a nerd and what constitutes geeking and gaming and all that jazz. So I helped to create the first Geek Week at UCSC this past year, and so when we were trying to reach out and get people from across campus, and UCSC is a big campus, we weren't just reaching out to like, hey, digital arts and new media, do you want to share your games? Though we did, we were also reaching out to anthropology and literature and fem studies, because there's geekiness in all realms, and just because you might not be saying my main thrust is being a gamer, because mine's not, mine's storytelling, but you can say, how do you come across your own personal geekdom or your favorite part of gaming from your particular lens? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So and I think there's been a few studies of even tabletop games where, if you look at the top two, any ranking, I won't name any websites, but rankings of top tabletop games, that women are extremely underrepresented, as are other groups on those lists. And additionally with esports, I think if there's comparisons from esports to physical sports, one could have theorized that the physical attributes that people could make excuses that explain the pay gap in professional physical sports. Well, hey, esports is all behind a keyboard and a computer, so we should be able to pull all that stuff out and it should be equal. That has not happened. And so men overrepresent decision makers in esports and game designers in esports. And so I'm curious if any of our panelists want to talk about their thoughts on how that emerged, why that emerged, and what we can do to create a more equitable space, and what people are doing to create an inclusive, enjoyable space for everyone.
I have huge thoughts on this. So there was another panel on esports yesterday, and one of the panelists made a comment that esports is like a 20-year secret overnight success. Like esports has been around for a while. And I use that to preface, I'm gonna put a shout out for one of my favorite books by T.L. Taylor. It's called Raising the Stakes. And it's about esports. And she has a chapter on this very topic that I love. But essentially, studies have been done to show that like the ability for women and men, and the study was very binary, to develop the sort of hand-eye coordination and skills needed to succeed in esports, like there is no difference. Like, so like given like the same, so like if everything were neutral, which nothing is, but if everything were neutral in an ideal world, like men and women could develop the same skills to be successful in esports. So like Brian's question is, why don't they? And I think it's related to something a few of you have hit on, which is just like access and opportunity. From early ages, young women often don't have the same opportunities to build these skills, to access equipment that they need, good internet to play games on the same level. Sometimes it's a matter of they don't feel welcome in the space due to their gender, or they're explicitly told they're not welcome due to their gender. So a lot of it is just access to the opportunities to develop their skills, and also the support that they need to continue to succeed in these spaces. And then so like the pipeline, as we call it, tends to be filled more with young men, because they do go into spaces where they're not treated differently because of their gender. And like a lot of what I hear in this conversation that makes me really angry, and that I talked about actually in the Girls in Gaming camp last week, was like this idea of like building a thick skin and like just get over it because gaming is like this. I don't think gaming has to be like this. I don't think it has to be at all, but that is part of the problem. I mean, who wants to play in a space, like even if, say, you're in the small percentage that can make it as a professional gamer, why would you want to be there if you're going to be treated differently constantly all the time and belittled because of your skills? So I think a lot of it isn't skill based. I think it's just community support is sometimes lacking. So like women often have to find each other and play together, but then that sort of limits their opportunities to go into these. There's a lot of overlap now between like the way esports is modeled in traditional sports. So what you see is there are women's tournaments, and then there are like the tournaments, right? The real tournaments. So that division continues to exist. And on the one hand, it's needed because these young women need the opportunity to build support, to have people like them that understand their experiences and build their skills, but then it prevents them from the actual areas of success, from feeling comfortable in those spaces and learning to play. So like, it's a huge issue, and that was my little rant about it.
Thank you.
Kind of curious if you, if Aaron were here, I used to talk to him about this too, about even game design, hardware design too. I don't know if you've had a chance to talk to him about that too, but I was really intrigued to hear about that as well.
Yeah, so Aaron, like Brian mentioned, his specialties on Dungeons and Dragons, and I did work with him on a project where he was looking at like just even the earliest designs of Dungeons and Dragons, like some of the tropes. So like whenever women weren't like, gender wasn't an option in the earliest game, like you weren't encouraged to identify as a woman, like it was just assumed that the player was a man, and that a lot of the monsters in the game were often women, but they would be shown as monsters. Like you would have the hag, or like the monster spider woman, or like you would come across the succubus, and her whole deal was to like bring you down. Like there wasn't a lot of like positive interpretations of women. And what's important about Dungeons and Dragons in this context is that a lot of the mechanics and the tropes in that game like became the basis for a lot of the video games, especially like RPGs that we play now, and then that in turn the first-person shooters and like battle arena games that we play in esports. So yeah, that was a great question. Thanks, David.
Yeah, and it's important to note that with Dungeons & Dragons, we're still doing a lot of work about gender and race in particular, because how we like, not to shift the conversation slightly, how we codify race in Dungeons & Dragons is like, orcs get to be more buff, but orcs are really thinly veiled metaphors for racism. And so when we're talking about both gender and race in Dungeons & Dragons, there are mechanical benefits and downsides to playing different combinations of characters, where you can't actually really explore maybe a certain intersectional background because the crunch isn't good. I mean, I'm gonna put the crunch isn't good as someone who plays characters who are not optimized, because that's not what I'm interested in telling. But when we're looking at spaces with monsters and with things that have now influenced game mechanics. It's I forget who does the research, but there's someone who talks about phantasmal media, about how our stereotypes and prejudices get coded, like legitimately coded into computers and games, and screening to get jobs. So like these are really important things to fight against, because it's affecting our ability to get jobs or just enjoy a game of Dungeons and Dragons with your friends.
Yeah, and then the exciting thing about too around gaming and esports too is how do we continue to build more access or deconstruct really damaging either tropes, stereotypes, et cetera, about even access to certain games too. I think that has been exciting to see. Everything from research tied to exposure to say esports and connection to confidence in STEM and sciences and connection to technology. The other intriguing thing that I thought was really fun to know about the history even design of gaming consoles, right? So typically these are probably non-diverse males who are designing game consoles and remotes that are based upon their hands, their physical characteristics, right? And so even that by design sometimes can impact those who maybe have smaller stature, smaller hands, whatever, in terms of actually engaging in gameplay too. So it's little things like that systematically then create concerns, issues, or even access to participation. So, yeah.
I absolutely agree. I think all those things about things that are innate to games that are sexist, definitely pose a barrier, even for college communities where women come to gaming groups and they want to play their favorite games, but they also want to have conversations about hey, this new character design kind of bothers me, or this redesign was kind of weird, and to have a community full force saying no, I really love that. It might be a little bit alienating. So I think having those discussions and opening those discussions is also a good way to promote more gameplay for women, and more practice means you'll get better, and maybe more representation there too.
Yeah, and it's important to note that when folks critique games or things they love, they don't do it because I hate Dungeons and Dragons. It's I love this thing and I want it to be better. So when we're recently Dungeons and Dragons tried to talk about trans stuff and really missed the mark. And so why we're talking about it is not because we're oh, that sucks, I hate Wizards of the Coast. It's more hey, you had a cool concept, now write it better. Do it better. We talk to trans authors, talk to trans people, talk to us. Because we want you to be better. And that's the kind of thing of also when it comes to physical hardware, we need to think about things that are accessible in terms of joint movements, because we have folks who are really amazing gamers who need adaptive tech, and if you can't get that at a competition, or you're forced to bring your own, and that might be against rules. I know nothing about esports. It's hey, I'm really good at this thing, but I can't use this controller. It's going to mess up my joints. Yeah. So
And I know that the idea of some of these improvements or measures of inclusivity might seem challenging or difficult to do, but if you've ever been at a Super Smash tournament or a Street Fighter tournament and you see how much effort goes into participants to optimize their gear, we could shift some of that energy into doing some of this stuff, and we could do just fine. So we did start to get into game design and game mechanics. And so I'm wondering if our panelists have any thoughts on either advances in game mechanics or game design, or good examples that bring this conversation to life, either in tabletop gaming, analog gaming, or esports.
So one of my favorite stories, and I forget what game it is that you're presented with two binary genders, but if you look at the coding, there's 7 different gender options depending how you play your character. So when we're coding stuff, we have the ability to make different gendered options. But one thing that I really, to talk quickly about a game, I really like this game called Monster Prom. You romance monsters, and from the beginning you pick a character, and then you get to pick your own pronouns. And it doesn't really affect anything in the game, mechanics-wise, other than what the characters call you. So you can play someone who's very femme-presenting and say, I use he, him pronouns, and my name is Hubert Pubert, I can't think of a good name, and nothing will change about how the characters interact with you. And it's one of those moments of wow, that was a really small character moment. And it's also important to know they have they, them, theirs pronouns. And the only thing I would add is hey, maybe we can add our own pronouns to things. But it's moments like that you can not inject diversity, but there's small changes you can make that make people feel more seen.
Yeah, so my work deals mostly thinking about gender representation, which I do sort of teach as a topic. We offer this course at UCI called Computer Games and Society, and I'm frequently the teaching assistant for it. And one game that I like to highlight for my students, and I make them play because, or at least it used to be available on itch.io, I don't know if it still is, but it's Anti-Anthropes Dysphoria. It's a series of little mini games that introduces the topic of transitioning, in this case from a man to a woman, and what that experience is like, both like the feeling of it, but also like sort of cultural reactions and social reactions to it. And I like it because it gives students a new way to think about how complicated gender representation is in games. It not only tells the story of transitioning, but like it gives you a way to think about it and experience it through mechanics. I think independent games or indie games are doing a lot more interesting things, sort of pushing against some of the things that Brian highlighted, as opposed to mainstream games, but some of them are doing better. So for one game I was thinking of just now was Apex Legends. It's a new sort of competitive game that has several women, and they're women of color. They don't match sort of like damsel in distress or like sexy sidekick stereotypes. They are just sort of badass women that have sort of role-specific equipment and role-specific armor and role-specific skill sets. So, and that's one example I can think of where like the game just sort of doesn't say like, oh, special woman or special man, and we went out of our way. It just sort of presents these characters as people, as opposed to just sort of highlighting what's different about them.
So we do want to leave some time for questions, but I know that our panelists probably were prepared. There's a few, I know that there's individual stories about your own personal experiences. There's other games that folks are playing. I think we've focused a lot of our energy and our time on the panel talking about the community of gamers and folks who might show up and play, but there's also ways that games can teach folks who are not interested, who might not think of games in this way. Like Consenticle comes to mind, which is a game that I play tested a few years ago. That consent is a huge topic on college campuses around dating, sexual harassment. There's so many different relatable topics, and this is a deck-based two-player game where essentially the capital and the game mechanics are all around consent and satisfaction in relationships. And I don't think I've ever had an experience that made me reflect more on consent when I'm playing. Actually, Aaron was the one I was playing the game with. And so there's ways too that games can actually help address issues on campus as well. So before we open it up to questions, if there's any final thoughts or stories or insights that any of our panelists would want to share, I'd give you the opportunity now before we open it up.
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to share one story of just like how women in games, especially on college campuses, are just constantly under scrutiny and expected to present in a certain way. So for example, I was talking to a friend who had talked to his friends back home about me and about my favorite character in League of Legends, which is Gnar. If you're not familiar with Gnar, he's like this little yordle that can become a huge monster. And what I love about him is not only is he cute, but he's also like his mechanics are really cool. He can be ranged and also tanky and do a lot of CC as well. So I really like the play style and also the visual aspect of him. But my friend was saying that his group was like, oh, she likes Gnar, like, oh, I guess he's kind of cute. Which obviously, on the surface level, you can see a lot of things wrong with that, like the fact that they had to like qualify why I would like Gnar as, because he's cute. But also, it's fine for me to like a character if I think he's cute, And I think that highlights something that I want to say, which is in our pursuit of empowering women and fighting against these stereotypes, it's important to also just like, not just empower them to be the opposite of the stereotypes, but also just empower them to be whatever they want. I see a lot of women in college campuses that kind of dress masculine to get more legitimacy when they talk. I think people that dress like men are often treated more legitimate or like more like a gamer, but it's totally fine to wear dresses and skirts and everything in between. So I think breaking down those barriers wherever they stand is very important.
Yeah, I'm going to build off of that. I have kind of a different experience with my gender, but that's okay. So as a young professional, I find that when I dress very femme, I get a lot more like people paying attention to me. But also when it comes to gaming, the fact that I can present very femme, which is not my usual standpoint, makes people go like, wait, what? You have opinions? Whoa. But I have so many opinions. I lost my train of thought. So when it comes to the places that I think are doing interesting work and just experiences with gaming, I've had a really amazing time working with like the indie community through Dungeons and Dragons, through role-playing games. Please check out, I will give you all my Twitter. Please, I'm gonna reblog or retweet a bunch of games that are doing some really amazing work, like Swordsfall, which is like all black fantasy. I lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry. Sorry to ramble. Someone else say something and I will figure out what I was saying. I'm so tired.
I guess hopefully this isn't too much of like a down note, but I wanted to highlight, I guess, sort of why I think this is important work. I mean, my PhD is in informatics, but I like to joke that it's in video games. It's important to me to make the sort of interventions that I think all of us are making in games. So I wanted to highlight a conversation that I had. So the Girls in Gaming camp that I mentioned, I was invited back as a guest speaker this year. I wasn't, normally I volunteer as a camp counselor, but I didn't have time this year. And I ran like a mini workshop, and the topic was harassment and toxicity. So I was talking about these young women, about their experiences gaming online, ways that they could protect each other, ways that they could protect themselves while they're playing. And it was really disheartening for them to tell me like some of the encounters that they have, like the get in the kitchen and make me a sandwich joke that many women in games have probably heard. Like, these are young women that still hear this, like that I heard like 20 years ago when I started gaming. And like, it's really, really disheartening to me. But I guess I just wanted to say that like I still do this because I think like we can make positive change together, that like and I do think it is getting better. So like on the one hand, while these young women do have these sorts of experiences, on the whole, like they were really optimistic about like games that they play, the communities they belong to, the futures they might have in gaming. And I think it's really important to highlight that as well, both the good and the bad.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that games have a really big potential because you can go online and play exactly equal to everyone else. Unfortunately, we still have to kind of like veil ourselves to be treated equally. I have a friend whose IGN is Julia, and she gets comments all the time. My IGN is more gender neutral, so people don't treat me any certain way. But obviously, we want to work towards a reality where it's fine to have whatever name you want.
I mean, for me, I'll be brief. In terms of the work we do around equity and social justice in higher ed, for me, it's a moral imperative. I think in many ways, I found my way here because of a combination of one, being someone who was a game enthusiast and mainly just doing first-person shooters growing up or even fighting games. And oftentimes I found myself consciously trying to challenge certain ideas and assumptions about what characters you even choose when you actually participate in the games. Fast forward that to the last 6 years, I was working with our first sexual violence prevention centers at UC Berkeley and starting that, and realizing that if we're going to do this work in one sphere, for me, I was intensely focused on issues of racial and ethnic identity and social justice. We need to do the same things around other forms of gender-based violence. And so how we live that is really important, and that's been part of the reason why I want to continue this conversation at different levels. So.
Right, and this is just one room in the house of nerddom, and this you may have tangential experiences, buying a comic on the floor, or talking about films, or any number of media, and we also know that we probably could have talked for hours about any number of these, and we didn't get to everything. So we want to honor all the things we didn't talk about, but we have about 5 minutes for questions. So if anyone in the audience has a question for our panelists, either about the content or even if you are a student, so 5 minutes for questions. If you're a student looking for community, how to find a club or an organization, how to find a cool professor, please ask away.
Can I quickly finish my thought?
Yes, go for
cool.
it.
So the two things is one of my favorite live stream stories is that one of the best Overwatch streamers goes in complete furry cosplay every time they compete. Turns out he's a black gay man. He was like suck it. And then in terms of building it into, like, building these expectations into better things, I help arrange 24-hour charity live streams for Dungeons & Dragons, and it's just, when I say, hey, you're gonna play, here's a line of expectations. You will do a 0 session where you will talk about what you expect from your other players, and if you can't do this, you don't get to play. And people are really willing to do that when they realize it's to build a better community in a safer space.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Cool.
Questions?
Are there any questions from folks in the audience? Questions or experiences or thoughts?
Cool, we covered it all. It's all good.
Oh,
Wonderful.
we can wait.
We've solved
Hey,
gaming.
We solved all of it.
Uncomfortable silence is okay in
Yeah,
my
totally.
world.
I'm good with that too.
Yeah, I've learned to wait it out when my students are silent.
Yeah, absolutely. Teach it pedagogy here.
Hey. All right.
Right, we could do a whole other panel about funding higher education and
Yeah.
sponsors, and I also think one thing we didn't really touch on is data privacy and how when folks are engaging in esports specifically, and this is a little bit different than some of the analog games, how all that intersects. But congratulations to your student, first of all. I hope your student's having a great experience in college now, and yeah, it's a whole new world out there.
Yeah, the one thing I will add to that too is having conversations around other benefits that include competition, scholarships that are available too. I've also had greater conversations with my fitness and recreation staff because they didn't really understand the value of both physical and intellectual kind of knowledge around participation in certain gaming or even esports, talking about even the science of it now too. So it's been good to have those conversations. And you're right, it's been around for a while, for a long time, but I think now there's a different audience willing to listen in a different way too. So.
Yes, Devon. Oh, do we have a question over here too?
Yeah, I was just going to ask about like streaming playing into this whole realm, because I think that adds a different lens of like literally a lens of like you are sort of performing, playing a game, and how you are experiencing maybe bullying on the bad side, but also community building. I think institutions are also like helping to like platforms for their esports teams to be like, hey, look how awesome our students are. This thing that they're really good at, they're competing. They're like making an officially branded Twitch channel to like host their students and that sort of thing. So I guess any anecdotes or experiences with, because I've honestly just gotten into Twitch and I've been really enjoying just like community on there.
Yeah. So what has streaming done? How does that factor in?
I'm like vibrating with excitement because my dissertation's on streaming. So live streaming on like Twitch, or where people can play. They can play video games, but they also do other things, and other people watch. It's very interactive in a way that like watching YouTube is not. So actually, the task force that I mentioned that I'm on, that's revising like the code of conduct language in our arena, came about because of this question. Like, well, if we're going to have players like streaming on university channels, we have a Twitch esports channel now, or on their own in their free time, like shouldn't we have policies in place to sort of manage their behavior, because now they're essentially like student athletes, they're representatives of the university, so we should make sure that we have certain policies in place that govern that. So I mean, at UCI we're working that out. It is a thought, and like absolutely like streaming, you're putting yourself out there, like it's you, and it could be, well, depending on your audience, like hundreds of people that are watching you, and you have to manage this communication, and like sometimes awful things get said to you, and you have to like the emotion of managing that. I don't know what happened there. So no, it's a good question, and actually that is what I want to answer with my dissertation work specifically. Like, what is it like for women who want to be professional streamers or just to work as streamers? The sorts of labor that they have to manage, and part of it is emotional labor. Like, what happens to you when something goes wrong? Like, how do you have to deal with that and still be presentable on stream, because all of your money comes from how entertaining you are? So no, that's a great question.
So we're going to wrap up, and that's actually a good segue. I hope you stay for our next panel, Career Advice for College Geeks, because there might be some overlap. But please give it up for our panelists. They did a great job.